We met off of a dating website. It wasn't even apps. There was no swiping yet. There weren't even touchscreens. It was just an app, and you had like a Nokia flip phone. And I would just never forget her profile said, "Where have all the cowboys gone?" And I grew up in Scranton. Like, I don't even know if I saw a horse before I was 20. I've never been on a horse, mostly for their safety. And I just couldn't imagine, like, the most cowboy thing about me was I once smoked a Marlboro Red in middle school and had an Emmett Smith jersey. Okay. Like, there was nothing cowboy about me. Well, you're listening to Jaywalking Life Unfiltered with moi, Jay Yoder. Today, we get into stuff. Life's messy, but it's also beautiful, and so we like to talk about that. And by we, I mean I, because it's just me. I was an only child, so I have no problem talking, as most of you have been tuning in know. And this week, we're kind of piggybacking off the fact that it's still Autism Awareness Acceptance Month. I actually didn't know this, but there's a distinction that people like to make between awareness and acceptance. I don't know if you realize which one is supposed to be better, but acceptance, obviously. Awareness is one thing to know it's aware, but to get to a place of acceptance, I mean, it is semantics. At the same point, we just want to all live in this world together and appreciate each other. And as the father of someone who's on the spectrum, that's all I want. I want acceptance for her. I don't want them just to be aware of her. I want them to accept her and all of her beautiful idiosyncrasies. And that's, this weekend, it was funny. I was away with board teachers, and my wife texted me because she'll always text me when something will happen. And so they went to the library, and Alicia loves books. Like, that's one of her big special interests. She always has to have 3 books in her hand before she leaves the house. A lot of them are like graphic novels, Babysitter's Club, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, like some of those things. And apparently she's on a new series that follows a girl named Huda, and I guess the name of the author is like Huda Fahmy, and she's obviously writing, but from a perspective of kids who are Muslim. And so Alicia's just been really into reading the books, but the name of the book is Huda F. Cares. And so my wife sent me a photo of the picture, and it's a playful title. It's obviously it seems like it wouldn't be like appropriate for kids, but she kind of talks about that in the preface of the book. And it's meant to be just a graphic novel, like the Babysitter's Club and things like that. But apparently, like when they were in the library, Amanda's like, "Well, hey, what'd you get?" And she's like, "I got this book, Who F Cares? Ha ha ha, do you get it? Do you get it, mommy?" And Amanda's like, "No, Alicia, what's funny about it?" She's like, "I'm not going to tell you. You'd be mad." I'm just like, that's so adorable. It's cool also that she's kind of the humor of it, because sometimes I'll crack jokes and she'll just be like, "Was that a joke?" And, I have to be like, "Yes, baby, that was a joke." But, it's funny to kind of see the difference. And I've been binging hard Love on the Spectrum because it just dropped a new season. And just spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about it quite a bit today. So if you haven't watched it yet, maybe table this episode till after you've watched it, because we're definitely going to be walking down that aisle a little bit because I'm obsessed with it. I actually was on the road with board teachers last week. I was out in Johnstown near Pittsburgh and West Virginia. And after the shows, like, it's such a huge rush because you're like out there performing for, 2,000 people, for 20 minutes, just making them laugh, hopefully every 10 to 15 seconds. And it's such a rush on stage. And then you get off and you're just like, and then we do a meet and greet after. So, they'll stay after. We'll take photos. We'll talk briefly. And so, by the end of all of that, the 2.5 hours that we're there in the building, you're just like drained at the end. And so like the only thing I dreamed of after the last show was getting back to the airport hotel, ordering some DoorDash, and watching Love on the Spectrum. That was like all I wanted to do to kind of like decompress. And I've loved the other episodes. I don't know if you've watched it before, but it originally started with like an Australian version. They had like 2 seasons, and then they did an American one. They just dropped like the 3rd season. And again, I'm completely obsessed. And I just love watching people fall in love. I love all of that stuff. Makes me think about like even my own relationship. With my wife, we met off of a dating website. It wasn't even apps. There was no swiping yet. There weren't even touchscreens. It was just an app, and you had like a Nokia flip phone. And I would just never forget her profile said, "Where have all the cowboys gone?" And I grew up in Scranton. Like, I don't even know if I saw a horse before I was 20. I've never been on a horse, mostly for their safety. And I just couldn't imagine, like, the most cowboy thing about me was I once smoked a Marlboro Red in middle school and had an Emmett Smith jersey. Okay, like, there was nothing cowboy about me. So it was just, so I feel like I was like pretending. I pretended I didn't smoke at the time because I did smoke cigarettes, and she had said she didn't like smoking, which I'm like, come on, don't cowboys smoke? So I had to pretend I didn't smoke, so I just wouldn't smoke that day. Or if I did, I would wear like a batting glove, and then I would like immediately go take a shower and not wear the clothes that I had on. And I just think about all of them. They call it masking within the autism world, but I think about we all put on a mask. We all do something, especially when you're dating. I mean, that whole first 6 months of meeting someone, especially if you're not living with them or, they're not in your daily life, you can be whoever you think they want you to be. And that's what I love about watching Love on the Spectrum, because the filter's off with these kids. Like, it's just so fun to watch them be brutally honest about how they feel. I remember in like one of the first seasons, they were just like, yeah, I don't like this. Let's just not do this anymore. And then they just stopped the date like 10 minutes in. And I was like, you can do that? Like you could just be honest about how you're feeling. And I think that's what's so beautiful. So I don't know if you've watched the episode. I'm going to recap a couple of the characters, because they had a returning characters who I feel like everybody knows Abby and David. They're like the two, because they actually fell in love from the first season, and they've been in this relationship ever since, and they are adorable. And if you watch the end of the second season, they both went to like Africa with their families, and they both love The Lion King, and they both at the end of the like season finale were like singing The Lion King together as like the sun was setting, and it was like the most adorable thing ever. And so they're back, which is great. And I love watching Abby's TikToks. Her mom and her do a lot of TikToks, which I think are great, because there were things I learned from or how her mom explains working with her that I thought was amazing. Like, to help her understand how to have a conversation, they do this thing where they roll a ball back and forth. And I was like, oh, that's genius. I get how some of those work. So I love how much they share about Abby's growth and journey. So as a parent, I love it. So they're back. James is back. If you know James, this guy is adorable. 36-year-old man, but he lives with his family still, and he's like very high strung, but he's like super intelligent, super introspective. But you could tell based on when he's around certain people, when his nervousness is, that energy kind of happens. But you can see when he's eventually he meets someone. I don't want to spoil it for you, but he meets a girl, and you can tell like the timbre in his voice goes down. It's like beautiful to kind of see the calming nature of when somebody finds their match. And it's so easy to see that. There was another couple, Danny and Adon, who like got hot and heavy, but that's because Danny is like, she's DTF. Like, she was horny. She and it's so cute and adorable, but like at the same time, Adon was like so reserved. And they had an anniversary date on this new season, and they got all dressed up, beautiful, romantic dinner. They gave each other romantic, thoughtful gifts. He like made a book about like photos of their first year together, their first kiss, and he thanked her at the end for being his kissing coach. And then she is an animation specialist, so she made an animation thing. And then at the end of it, it was like, let's do the deed. It was like them like at dinner, but then ultimately going to a bedroom and getting under sheets and like the sheets moving. And then he kisses her at the end, and she's like, we should dive deeper, like second base. And Adon's like, do you mean like scuba diving? And I was like, that is adorably hysterical. And it's just, you could see, it was kind of interesting with those two, I thought, because Adon stuck to his guns and was like, I don't want to have sex outside of marriage, and like had to break the news to Danny, and he was wondering how she was going to take it. And I was like, oh, like these families like are just amazing to see, like the values they've instilled in their kids, regardless of whether on the spectrum or not. I just think a lot of these families are really cool too. Connor is back, who the season before, I really thought he was great because he did the speed dating, and he was like advertently like putting the no mid conversation with the person like right in front of their face so they could see it. But the poor kid like would have such anxiety that he was like weighing every option down, and you're just like, oh dude, like it's okay, take a breath, it's not that serious, it's not that deep. But for him, the way that I understand now how autism manifests, it's like for him, a lot of those bars were the way I describe, like when some of my friends who don't understand autism, or to the best of my understanding, I often describe it for some of my guy friends that it's like, imagine you're making a player on like 2K. And when you get this player, you can't just make him the best. You can't give him attributes in every category. You get so many things and then you distribute it accordingly. And so what happens with someone on the spectrum or someone neurologically, they just got some of those pieces distributed differently. So certain things went to 100% that for most people would have been at 30%, and vice versa. Some things that are at 0 that would have been at 50 for someone else. And so it's like you can see how some of those manifest when you're put in situations where you'd expect someone to act this way, but then they act a different way. And that's really it. But what you're noticing with some of these kids in the therapies that they do, and what I've noticed with my own daughter, is that they can really push their bar a little bit farther in certain areas that maybe they didn't have much. And so like I noticed the hugest difference in Connor from like last season to this season, because he was like, he's still that same guy, but he's like so much calmer, and you could hear the talk with his mom. His mom was like, "Oh, I love that positive talk, oh, you had time to process it." And as a parent, I love listening to the families more than I think anything else, because it's like, for me, it's almost like, oh, okay, what should I be looking for when my daughter, who's now 11, is 26? Like, what's that road in the next 15 years going to look like? And for me, like, that's the most interesting piece, because then you can see some of the families, are they together anymore? And you don't see a lot of dads on the show. So like, I've never seen Connor's dad. I've never seen Abby or David's dad. I've never seen Tanner's dad. We saw Adon's dad. And then Danny seems to be with her aunt and her aunt's husband. So there's a male figure there as well. He kind of lays back, but he chimes in every once in a while. And then James's parents are together, and they're adorable because they're obviously older because he's 36. And I love watching just sort of how they all are. So like and then there's some new characters this year. Perry, who lives with just her mom. And then Madison, who lives on her own, which I thought was really interesting. She's 26, but her parents are still together. And her dad was, like, I thought, the best spirit. So if you watched it, Madison's like this 26-year-old who is just like, lives on her own, has her obsessions with her American Girl dolls, and makes jewelry and like sells it at like flea markets and stuff. And she's got some friends from church, and like they're neurotypical friends, and they come over and make beads. So it's like cool to watch her. And she's so self-aware of all of her issues. And then she ends up going on a date with a guy, and God bless her, she was such a sweetheart, but the guy was like overwhelmed sensory-wise. So he was like putting his head on the table, needed his headphones. He was like putting noise-canceling headphones in so he couldn't even hear her. And she was such a sweetheart dealing with it. And then she found a guy at the end, a guy named Tyler, and they're like, go hot and heavy for each other. At first, it was adorable. They were like very cute. And he's like a radio DJ guy that does a lot of events for his church. And so he apparently knows every single key that a country song is ever in. So she just starts machine gunning him with this Garth Brooks song, Shania Twain. And he's just like, oh, C, A, then B. When Beyonce did it, it was C flat. And I'm just like, what? And they were like a perfect match. And then they get all like hot and heavy for each other. And then they meet the parents. And in the middle of meeting the parents, are like full on making out in front of them in the kitchen. And you could just see Madison's dad like not know what to do, because he's like having the typical dad emotions. But you could also tell that for probably the last 8 years, he's like, she's probably not going to meet someone. She's probably not. And then he's like having this vision of like, okay, well, be careful what you wish for, because you wished for her to find someone. Now they're out making out in front of you. But he's like the sweetest boy. And they're just kind of like in love. And it's adorable. And he like stops to ask the parents. He's like, can I talk to your parents alone? And you're like, dude, they just met. Is he really going to ask for her hand in marriage? No, he just wanted to take her to Universal on Saturday. And you're just like, oh, that's friggin' adorable. So I just love watching the show. And then there's like some matches that happened. Like, I can't talk enough about Connor and Georgie. Like Connor like had this girl for the first date where she was like, if you watched it, it was a girl who apparently was from Nashville that watched the show, and they kind of like, they didn't really hit it off. And then all of a sudden, he meets Georgie, and you could just tell like he has all those fireworks talk that he was talking with his mom about, and friggin' adorable watching them. Because he's just so, and then they kiss at the end, and I think he almost fainted. Like he was like out of it. So it's just cool to watch how they all feel sort of those kind of emotions, because we all feel those emotions. It's just the processing for someone with autism is so different, and I can appreciate that. I really enjoy kind of watching the whole process. And then if you watch to the very end, Abby and David, Abby does this song, and she must have taken voice lessons because it sounded like a single Beyonce could drop, and she was just like belting out this song. And I'm telling you, you better get the Kleenex out when you're watching this episode, because that part in particular, adorable. It's because they're talking about, are they going to get married one day, and the families are like so invested in that, and they were talking about stuff I didn't realize. Like I didn't realize that you could do, like if couples were living together, you could have someone kind of come in every day and kind of check in on them. And that's basically what they would do, like almost like an assisted living, just to make sure they're cleaning the house, they're doing some of the things that they're supposed to be doing. Because those are the things that I want to look at for my own daughter. Like we're in this phase now with Alicia where she's hitting puberty. She's 11, her body's changing, all of that stuff's happening, and we could see her changing. So now I'm like, oh, we're going to be in this like phase now where the game's changing. And I heard Madison talking on this, who's 26, and she was talking about how she used to be earlier, like, and she always says something funny. She's like, yeah, I would just put anything in my mouth. And I'm like, whoa, girl, settle down. But like she was talking about how she was younger and biting and all of these things where I'm like, oh, wow, like, there's a whole period here of hormones and adjustment that every kid happens. Somebody told me a quote this week that I thought was interesting. Like we were talking about love on the spectrum and some of the kids, and they're like, yeah, I mean, kids are kids. Like even kids who are special needs kids, they're more like regular kids than they're not. And that's the reality. The reality is that, that's why we need acceptance and not just awareness, because they're more like it. Alicia is going to act like a teenager. Right. And it's not the autism. It's just her being a teenager. And how do you decipher between those two worlds? I mean, that's something that, stay tuned, because I don't know. I know right now she's got a thing going on with homework. And so she knows it's happening every day. And they only send math homework. Like that's the only homework she gets. And no matter how many breaks you give her or whatever, the minute you mention, okay, it's time to do your homework, and you do it in the most like nonchalant voice, it just flips a trigger in her. And then it's just like she gets into what they call echolalia, where she just kind of scripts back phrases, and she's like, I don't want to do my homework. It's stinky. It's smelly. And then she starts writing that on the homework. And you're just like, wow. Like, and usually she'll resist a little bit, but then she like gives in and does it. We're noticing the uptick of the defiance is like amped it up a notch. Like there's a new gear she has on her transmission. And that's new for us. And so it's like taming a wild stallion, sometimes to get her to a place where she can regulate herself to do the homework. And, it's like sometimes it's like 8:30 at night before she gets there, and she should be in bed by then. And it's just really difficult. We had a funny thing happen this weekend where while I was on the road, Amanda texted me. She was at Girl Scouts. And she's like, don't be mad, but Alicia used you for Girl Scouts, and apparently she had to come up with an invention. She had to be like a problem solver. And I'm like, okay, whatever that means. And she eventually came up with an invention called the Reminder, and she had to write like things that she was working on. I'm trying to find the actual text because it was funny. I haven't even turned it into a bit or anything like that yet. It's just too real for me at this point. But, oh, yeah, here it is. So she had to come up with 3 problems. She said, 3 problems in my life. And problem 1, she wrote, was staying asleep all night. I wake up, which is true. I mean, 4 a.m., you'll see the TV on in the living room, and you'll be like, what the heck is going on? And then she'll just hide her face like she's a kid, thinking that if she can't see me, I can't see her. And it's like, girlfriend, I can see you. And then the second problem she wrote is, and it looked like no is S bother me, but it was just noises spaced out. So noises bother me, which makes sense. She's been wearing her headphones on the school bus. I think I'd mentioned in a previous episode because of the driver having a baby on the bus, and the noise bothers her. I took her to Soul Jewels with me. We had baseball practice on Tuesdays now. I help coach the Challenger division, the special needs team. And so I often go do time at Soul Jewels after practice, and my wife had like a flat tire or whatever, so I brought her with me, and I was trying to find a good spot for her to be outside the showroom, but then they had line dancing, and the music was driving her nuts, and then we were trying to be in the restaurant, but the noise from the restaurant was bothering her, so we brought her headphones and sync it up to Bluetooth because noises do bother her. Step 3 that she wrote was, Daddy leaves stuff out and Summer eats it all. Summer's our dog. And I'm like, where did I come out of left field? You tell me Mommy doesn't do anything, Katie doesn't do anything, you're coming after me? And so then she had to have an idea of how to fix one of those. Well, of course, she picked the daddy problem. And she's like, Matt, make Dad clean up his stuff was her solution. And listen, we're talking about socks. What she's talking about are two things. One, when I get home at night, I like take my socks off when I'm on the recliner, and then they just sit at the bottom of the recliner on the floor. Whatever, sue me. But then Summer gets out of the cage, and then she's trying to eat them, and then Alicia runs around screaming at her, and that's the part that she wants to fix. So her solution was to have Google send him notifications, and then she storyboarded it. And when I say she, I mean my wife corroborated this whole thing with her. But she's like, oh, Daddy eats something. The other thing is if I like have a napkin or something, or I leave it on the counter, she'll grab the napkin. So she's like, Daddy eats something, then Daddy leaves it on the counter. and now the device supposedly is going to notify me when I do that to clean up my mess. And I'm just like, this girl, they see everything. That's what I don't realize about kids, is they see everything, and then they go and they tell their parents or they tell their teachers about it, and now everybody knows your business. And now everybody knows that I leave my napkins on the counter and my socks on the floor, and our dog tries to eat them. And you know what? Sue me, all right? Sue me, because I pay for that house you're living in, girlfriend. And who do you think is going to pay for that device that Google's going to remind me on? I am. But it is kind of interesting as parents when you come to grips with the fact that you do something, your kids see that you do something, and now you have to realize, oh, yeah, that's a bad habit I have. They see I have the bad habit now. They know it's a bad habit. And so I think as parents, like, that's the hardest pill to swallow sometimes, because it's always hard to take constructive criticism on something that, you know, you do and it's just a part of you, and you're like, listen, that's just how it is. And so I always love, and my younger daughter's the same way. She'll tell me straight up. She's got no qualms about telling me when I do something wrong. And so living in a house of women, that's what I realize is, you know, during the pandemic, it was crazy. I just treated every room had like this crazy changing weather pattern. So I just wore a poncho and like treated every interaction like it was a mugging. I just like threw candy in one direction and I ran in the other just to get away. And I just like go outside and be like, no woman, no cry. You know, I just need to get away from it all a little bit. But at the same time, I'm grateful, because without that, we need the checks and balances. Like, you know, when I knew I was going to marry my wife, it was because she was actually, one, able to live in my world. Like, she was able to be part of my own idiosyncrasies. And I'm from Scranton, and I have this really crazy family. And so the way I knew she was the one I was gonna marry is because I brought her home to Scranton for Parade Day. And if you don't know about Parade Day in Scranton, it's basically the week before St. Patty's Day, and it's known as like one of the largest on the East Coast. But it's like based on a stat that's like people participating versus people who live in Scranton. But because it's the week before, people from Boston, Philly, New York, they come, some of these groups, and they practice. It's like their practice round. And so for them, it's them amping up for the next weekend. And then for Scranton, they like open the bars at like 7 a.m. They're selling like 17-cent drafts. Like, they know how this is going down. And so it becomes this big binge drinking event. And when I turned 21 the night before. So like for me, I turned 21 and then got to go to Parade Day, out 17-cent drafts. I mean, it was a mess. But I brought her, so years later, you know, when we met, I'm like, oh, you got to come home for Parade Day. She met my family, met my friends, hung out the whole day, And then the next year, I couldn't go because I was coaching baseball, and we took the kids to Florida for spring break, and she went without me and went and hung out with my friends and my family and had a great time. And that was like, I was like, oh my God, like, so, I immediately felt like, oh, she's in my world now. And like watching some of these kids fall in love, like the moment when they know, the moment when they have their fireworks, it's just cool to relive that or see that. And I think when I watch stuff like Love is Blind, I'm like reliving those moments from the past when I know about the decisions I made. And now with Love on the Spectrum, when I'm watching the families, because really, like I said earlier, I'm watching the families because, a lot of times, and I talked about this on a previous episode, there's a lot of trauma with raising a kid of special needs because it takes all of your own emotional currency. You're really putting a lot of credit out there on your emotions to like stay in check. And so, you're doing so much for your kids. It's often hard for couples to then connect and find time for each other because you're so busy. Now, we're blessed because, with Alicia, at the end of the day, I know there's families that with kids with autism that have it way tougher than Amanda and I have. But it's still tough. Like even last night I saw Amanda going through it with her, trying to get her, because I'm trying to help, but I'm just elevating everything because I'm nowhere near as good as Amanda is. And I'm kind of like James's dad. If you ever watched James's dad on the show, he's just like, did you have fun? He's like, the most important thing is to have fun. And he like gets into these debates with James. And I sort of have that same mentality of like, I'm trying to be the counterbalance. Like I'm trying to be the person that I know they're going to meet in society that's maybe not going to give them as much grace, just to kind of like test the waters like a sparring partner would do, just to kind of let you know what that opponent's going to try to do to you in the ring. And I think that's where I come from. And I don't know that that's always healthy. Like I'm sure there's people listening to this right now and be like, that's not a good idea. But I think just that's my like emotional reaction in the moment with no training and nobody gave me a manual. I'm sure the hospital had a pamphlet. There always is a pamphlet, but I didn't know. So, like, that's mine. I can see that in James's dad. I know James's dad is older, too, and it's fun to kind of watch the mom and him, like, interact a little bit. But that's a strong couple. The fact that they're still together, they got their 36-year-old son still living with them, and I'm sure he puts them through the ringer with a lot of the way he circle talks and debates things. They were talking about alcohol being a depressant. His dad's like, well, you'd be surprised how much it stimulates people, and he's always giving him, like, the devil's advocate approach. Which again, I think he's just trying to do things like I try, where I'm just trying to counterbalance them. And so I love seeing that. But Amanda's so good with Alicia. But even still, I can tell for her, she's at the end of the emotional currency, because then like Alicia ran out of the room crying, screaming that I hate you to both of us because we wanted her to do her one math worksheet, like so melodramatic. But, you can only take so much of hearing that, even though she doesn't mean it. It's, like, so emotionally wearing to hear your kid say that. And you're like, all right, she's got to go regulate herself. Let her go up in her room. Let her cry it out. Listen to music. Bring it all down. And then we can have a rational conversation about how that made us feel. And she does all of that. Whereas I'm at DEFCON 1. I'm, like, calling in the National Guard. Like, so it's just... It's so hard. And there's not a group. There was no group that was like, oh, you have a kid who's autistic? Oh, okay, here's the class that teaches you how to parent them. That does not exist. It doesn't. Now, there are groups, there are organizations. That's why a lot of the comedy shows I've been doing, I've been trying to pair up with an organization to raise some money for them to maybe offer certain things. Like we just did a show with Autism Cares Foundation at Soul Joel's in Pottstown. And Joel Richardson, who owns it, was like super generous. Like he took what we made from the show and like quadrupled it and then wrote them a check. He didn't have to do that. He made $0 that night. And I'm sure, okay, people will say, oh, there's a tax write-off, whatever. But like, it was just nice to see that. And we're doing a show in Waverly, New York. By the time this is aired, I'll have been up in Waverly, and ticket sales are looking really good. So it looks like we're going to be able to give back to a school up there that serves students of special needs. Jason Goen, who does a podcast called The Parents Lounge up there, he also is helping me. We're putting it on together. And, his sons are autistic. He has twin boys who are autistic, and they go to that school. So he's got some of their therapists coming to the show. So it's kind of really cool to give back. And to also like normalize. You know, we're getting closer to acceptance by talking about all of this stuff, and that's what Love on the Spectrum's doing. They're bringing like not only awareness, but through the show. Like I guess Kean O'Leary's the guy who like is the executive producer. So every once in a while you can hear his voice pop in, and it's so funny. Like I love how he messes with like James was like in the intro wanted to like sit down. He's like, no, you're supposed to ask me. Well, you're supposed to say to me, welcome back, and I'm supposed to say this, and then you're gonna say this. And then James is like, all right, well, let's edit that. And like James walks off, and then he comes back on, and Kean plays along, and he says, welcome back. But he kept all of the previous footage in that James in his head thought was going to be cut. And because again, he's trying to show the process so that people see it. And I had a hard time watching the show at first. I couldn't, like, I had to microdose it because like the emotions were too real, and it was just too much for me to process. Because I look at these girls especially, and I see Alicia, you know, and I wonder, and it's in a beautiful way, but and also in a way that I don't know what's going to happen between 11-year-old Alicia now and like the 26-year-old Madison or Abby. Like these next 15 years scare me, but the Love on the Spectrum gives me like the light at the end of the tunnel. Like this is what can happen. This is what can happen if you stay the course. If I learn from my wife, if I learn from my own mistakes, and I'm willing to admit them and willing to grow from them, then we can do magic for these kids. And, you know, who knows whether love, whether she lives independently. We don't know any of that. But I'm sure the parents, I would love to talk to the parents and know what they were thinking when Madison was 11-year-old. What were they thinking when Abby was 11 years old? What were they thinking when she was 15 years old? Like I almost want the origin story. I want the prequel, because to me that's the hope I need, so that I can stay on the course, and I will. But it's nice to have that. So I follow Abby on TikTok. I follow a lot of them because I love to see what they're doing to normalize all of this. And that's the magic of why I love Love on the Spectrum. So if you've not checked it out, go watch them all. There's 2 Australian seasons. There's 3 American seasons. It's just wholesome, good, and we can see ourselves in all of it. That's why people always say, oh, I'm a little autistic. No, you're human. We're all human, and we're more alike than we're not alike. So whether you're talking about politics or anything, we're all more alike than we're not alike. So the more you can do to watch that and be a part of someone else's world, then that's a beautiful thing. All right. So thanks for jaywalking me this week. We'll see you next week.